Wow, they changed all of this. I guess I got to do it like this then. That works. No, I just missed like half of this stuff. All right, this is always a scary moment. Loading, loading, loading. Are we taking off? Are we ready for? Yes. Let's see. I am sharing my screen. Let's see if what I see in the chat here. Boom. Still keep an eye on that. Let me move that to the other thing. Brilliant. Right. Yeah. So before we start, I don't know who was at the festival and some of you weren't, but we mentioned it there as well. We have 2 new courses, and I'm very proud of these. Because one has been in the making for a long time, but then COVID made it very difficult with the traveling and the recording of it. But it's an introduction to conversational AI ethics. And I think when we initially started that project, it was very early. And people are like, yeah, well, why is it important? But I think now, it's perfect timing to release that. And the host of that course, it's not me, it's Cami Rincon. They are researchers at they are a researcher at the Alan Turing Institute in London, and they have a whole thing on ethics framework, and we've applied that to the CDI workflow. So for every step that you take as you're creating AI assistants, there are things to consider, questions that you should ask, things you should do to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And the example that always stands out for me a little bit was I talked to Jason Gilbert about that at the last festival. Was when you have a robot in the house and somebody says, I'm kind of depressed or something like that, or is not doing well, is that person aware that, on one hand, there are people reading those transcripts and listening in on those conversations? That's the first ethical concern already. And then the second is those people that are reading that and they're thinking like, oh, there might be something going on in this household. Do they have a responsibility to then inform doctors or other people about what to do? That you should do that. So there's all these interesting questions that you maybe not even be aware of that we're addressing in this course. So it's really, the AI ethics and how to apply these principles within the conversational AI workflow. It's really cool. And then the second course is the Conversational AI Workflow course. So where our original courses around conversation design are very much about how do I do conversation design and how do I get good at it and what do I need to improve, etc. That, repair messages and escalating detail and all the advanced techniques and stuff. This is really also for managers or people just starting out. Like, what is conversational AI? How do I need to be thinking about it? What's language that we should use to talk about these problems in a clever way? And it discusses the CDI workflow about, which step to take. Why is this step important? How do I apply it? And it goes for managers and functional teams. So it's kind of like the intro into all of it. So going forward, we expect people to take this course first to really understand those fundamentals, and then they, decide if they want to be a conversation designer or an AI trainer. So we're kind of adding a lower entry point into the conversational AI community. So if you're a conversational AI team, this would be the course that you might want to give to all your stakeholders around the project to educate them as well. So you might have it, you might give this to 50 people in your organization, and then maybe 5 or 10 of those would then continue their learning path as designers or AI trainers. So these are 2 things that are live. We're very happy. They're great production quality. We're very proud of them. And this Conversational AI Workflow course, it's got a workbook in it. It's got downloadables. It's got a lot of content around the video lectures themselves. So one of the things, people send in a bunch of questions as well. And they were like, do we still have a job? And I made a video about that the other day, about large language models, and everybody's talking about it, right? This is the thing that's like, OpenAI comes out with, Chat GPT. These large language models were already there for a while, shaking up the world, and everybody saw the potential. But now all of a sudden, because it actually has that chat interface, all of a sudden, like, it's hitting us. Like, what is this? This is big. It's going to transform the world. But what does it mean? And particularly in conversational AI, right? Um, do we still have jobs, or is AI something that can just do that automatically now? And I think that promise of AI, plugging it in and it works, and it replaces all these jobs. So far in conversational AI, we've seen that that's never really been the case, but it is different this time, right? And the way I sort of see it is that currently, people are the creators, and they're in the lead of creating these experiences. And, AI is kind of supporting them, right? It's like making it easier, increasing the productivity, helping out with a bunch of things. And over time, as these things get more advanced, maybe the AI will be the entity to create this, to actually create the dialogues. But then people will become more, doing the auditing, making sure it's the right tone of voice and tuning it and whispering in the AI's ear to make sure that it's doing the things we want it to be doing, right? So yes, they work together, they live together. People are very much in the driver's seat right now, and over time that might change, but it doesn't mean that there will not be a role for people in these work processes, because you can't just, if you're a public company, you can't just plug in an AI and have it talk to your customers. So yes, we still have jobs. We will continue to have jobs. But of course, over time, these jobs might simply change a little bit, which I think is cool. And at CDI, Brett Kinsella has joined CDI Foundation, and he will be leading a work group that is going to focus on this generative AI, on the synthetic media, to make sure that when these jobs change and there's a new skill set required, that CDI is right on top of it, which is really cool. So are there fun ways that I can already use Chat GPT when I'm creating conversations? Of course, like, there's cool stuff you can do. You can write a happy path. You can just ask it, write me a happy path for opening a bank account, or write me a happy path for, upgrading my phone. And it will just give you a happy path. Is it something you want to use? Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not. So yeah, if you're stuck, ask it for that. Or you can ask it to, can you simulate a conversation between a person and a chatbot to talk about this? And it will give you something to work with. And again, sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not. Also, let's say I have an audience persona or a bot persona, and it doesn't really come to life yet, and I need something. It's if write me a biography for a person that lives in Buenos Aires and is a conversation designer. I don't know, and has a dog and likes to play soccer, right? And it will write a persona for you, write a biography. And maybe you can use that, to make your stuff come to life, because then it's like, oh yeah, how would that person say it? One of the things that you see a lot is generating training phrases. Give me 20 ways to order a pizza. And you can use that if your scope is small and you're just trying stuff out, that's okay. But be very careful with this, because it might not be how your customers talk. So the training phrases don't really make sense to you. And also, this Chat GPT doesn't know what the rest of your corpus looks like, right? So it has no idea about the other intents that are in there, and how they have been trained, and how these training phrases relate to these other conversations. So be very careful with that. The same with entities, right? If you want to have synonyms for address or something like, and stuff you want to extract, be careful with that, because you can't just ask it and throw it in there. Take it with a grain of salt, but sometimes you might get some inspirations or some variations, right? It's like, for greetings, if you have greetings, like, ask it for 10 different greetings, and you have variations in your chatbot or voice application, which helps with a great customer experience. And then, of course, if you're really stuck, write me a prompt for X, Y, Z. And all of these things are, if you have a blank page and you're kind of stuck, ask it to do something, and it will help you. But don't just trust it blindly and throw it in. Again, you are in the driver's seat, and these systems can help you a little bit. You can experiment with them today, tomorrow, or you can wait a year. Like, it doesn't really matter. So conversational AI, why are we doing this again? Well, what organizations are trying to do, right? What they're trying to achieve, on one hand, they have automation goals. Organizations are always looking to save money, reduce costs to stay competitive. And they have customer experience goals because they want to be fun and cool and likable, because then people tell their friends. Conversational AI allows us to unify both automation and customer experience goals. Right? Because if I automate a conversation, it contributes to that, and it's actually quite nice for people if it works well. So that's why conversational AI is kind of like this holy grail for a lot of organizations. But yeah, it's still difficult, right? So what we see is a lot of companies, like they build for scope and they create all these chatbots and they deploy lots of use cases. But yeah, the design is really poor. So they have no adoption and their numbers are really low. Or sometimes like they just over design stuff. You said this particularly with smart speakers, and it's like a novelty experience that doesn't really add a lot of value. And then you're also wasting a lot of money, right? So how should you be thinking about it? Well, the more conversations you have, the better they should be. And as you add the scope, you slowly start adding to the experience. And if we look at the state of the industry right now, if you kind of add 4 quadrants to that chart, you see the leaders that have a lot of automation and a great customer experience, discovering other people, just starting out, quite a bit of scope, adding to it, slowly thinking about conversation design and the skill set that they need to do that properly. And then you got people that are squandering, that are just building without investing in design. And you've got the wanderers, right? And this is kind of where you can put most companies. And if you work at an enterprise and you see this, you probably have some sense of where you're at. What we see in general is, a lot of the banks are kind of up here. It's like, we've got quite a bit of scope in there, or we have a team that's designing, but, if we want to get it more personalized, we need to start getting to the next level. Telcos overall seem a bit more advanced. I think it's because they're more used to apps already. It's closer to their core business. A lot of health stuff, it's like they have a good experience because it's like in a way integrated and very personalized already, but there are only very few topics that they want to cover, right? And governments, yeah, they're always very robotic in what they're creating. Education, that's a good one, actually. I wouldn't know where they would sit in this chart. Retail, you could kind of retail's I would say retail's probably where the telcos are a lot of times, commerce and retail, because it's personalized, and the package tracking, which is like 80% of the volume, is handled quite a bit. But yeah, we can add those two. Good points. So yeah, if we look at these altitudes of development for AI assistants, you kind of see AI assistants grow up as a little baby, and then they become adults over time, and they have more and more capability. So as an AI assistant start out, they're harmless and kind, nothing but potential, and they kind of want to grow so that they can help people grow. They want to be successful so that other people can be successful. And then as they grow older, they start to develop their own personality. They start to understand things people say much better. They can answer questions and sometimes even help people get things done, right? So these are your FAQ chatbots that can answer questions, do a few transactions. If you look at the retail space, this is often the case, right? I can forward you to answers about FAQs, and I can track your package. So it's like that's kind of the scope for a lot of these things. And then every day we're getting smarter. We can help people with more. We can look up more stuff. I know how to keep people engaged, so I have more personality. I increase motivation, and I make it much easier for people to accomplish their goals. And then we become more integrated, right? So we're more integrated into the back end. We're active on more channels. We can build relationships with people. We make use of all the different systems that are out there, and we have a big team around us that's helping us perform every day to the best of our ability, speaking from the perspective of an AI assistant. And then, at one point, this is the holy grail. where, we're delightful. We can talk about everything. We can help people with everything. We recognize them, and people reach out to that AI assistant first because they know that will get the job done. So that's kind of how you see the development of AI assistants. That's the North Star that everybody has. But just like people in life, like you got to be a toddler, you got to be a baby before you can be a toddler, before you can be a teenager, before you can be an adult, or, a wise old person. So you got to go through these steps, right? So the more conversations you have, the better they should be. And as you start adding to scope, you got to start adding to certain design. You got to start adding certain design patterns to create better experiences. So that's kind of why we come in, right, with the CDI workflow. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. So it's strategize, design, and build. And initially, we look at, the operations, the technology that we need, the audience, and then the persona. So really, what are the conversations that we're going to be having? Who are we having them with? And who's best to have these conversations on our behalf? And that's our persona. That's kind of how these things relate to each other. And if we look at, scope, what are some of the use cases that we see? You can plot them almost all in these, right? So AI assistants, they're often created to reduce cost, grow revenue, grow reputation, or increase productivity, right? And then these things are internal facing, so they talk to our employees, or they're external facing, so they talk to our customers or patients, our students. It can be anything. And then sometimes these are existing conversations that we're automating. So customer support, for example, we're having conversations there and we're looking to automate that, but there are also possible conversations, things that we currently not talking about that we could be talking about. So maybe there's like a journey with a lot of friction there and lots of screens to click through. It's very complicated, where actually if we would have a conversational interface there, it would be much easier. So existing conversations and possible conversations. And then we have chat channels and we have our voice channels. And then within those channels, there are channels that we own and channels that we don't own that we can leverage. So we own our own website and we can leverage WhatsApp as a third-party interface. So all of these things, end up contributing to scope. So if we look at education here in the chat, I like that. Education, where you have smart mentors. So what would that do, right? In a way, if you have a smart mentor, it will grow your reputation as a school. It increases the productivity of your students. So your students would be external. And some of these use cases might be existing conversations where maybe they talk about, the admin stuff that people have questions about already. But it could also be about, just the content that they need to consume to be as a student, to actually leverage that into a conversation so that the information is more easily retained, right? And I would imagine this could be a chat channel, but it could also be a virtual being as a voice application where people talk to an avatar on the screen, and that would be their smart educator. So so all the use cases that you can kind of think of, you can use this taxonomy and think about that. Let's see. Just keeping an eye on the chat here as well. Best practice and principle. So, those are the conversations that we could be having. Then who are we having them with? This is from, the CDI course on where we have a family that goes to a holiday park. So we tried to create an image really of, who is our audience? Who are we having these conversations with? So this is Pete that wants to get the maximum out of his holiday and spend a lot of time with his kids. Yada, yada, yada. So this is one of the things that you can ask a large language model to create a whole backstory about a person like this, right? And make Pete come to life a little more. So you want to understand who you're talking to. And then you figure out who's the best person to have that conversation on your behalf. And that's your bot persona. So in here, this case, we have Henry as a butler, studied hospitality management, et cetera, et cetera. So in the CDI courses, we've got videos and lectures on how to do this, and there are canvases that you can use to really create this for your own brand. Because a lot of times organizations, like, we have an audience persona, we know who our customers are, and we know what our tone of voice is from the brand perspective, but we often don't really have a bot persona. Because the bot persona is not your brand itself, right? It's a person that is kind of the embodiment of your brand. and relates to your customers in a specific way. It also doesn't always have to be someone working at your brand, right? It could also be an ambassador of your brand, or it could be a former customer of your brand that's just excited that he's helping out new customers. So you can play around with that a little bit. We're not going to go into details for that now. So that's kind of, the first phase where we strategize, about what's the scope that we want to cover, who's our audience, and on which channels do they, how do they see the world, and on which channels do they live, and what do we want to leverage? And then, who's the persona that is going to inform our design work and our tone of voice. Then we go to the design phase. And what we really do is we mentalize the conversation, we have the conversation, then we validate it to make sure it's inclusive. And then we elevate that conversation by adding more advanced writing techniques and writing in that persona. So mentalize, verbalize, validate, and elevate. Those are really the main steps in the CDI workflow. And in the new course that we have, you'll see that, if you've been with us for a longer time, that we've kind of changed some of the wording here to make it a little easier and more up to date again. So mentalize, verbalize, validate, and elevate. So the mentalization process, how do we do that, right? So this conversation design canvas really helps you do that very well. It helps you ask the right questions as you're designing. So what you first want to do is kind of think of it as theater, that, there's a scene between two actors, and these actors, they both have their own perspective on the world. And because of that, there's kind of often a lot of friction, and they got to figure out how to move forward. If you look at movies or novels, what you see is that you have two characters, they both want something, there's conflict. And when both characters have transformed, it's the end of the scene and you can move forward. It's the same with AI assistants and people. So first we want to think about, when somebody reaches out for whatever topic, where are they likely to be? Who are they with? What are some of the time factors that we want to consider? I always say you have a very different conversation when it's rush hour and you're on the train than when, it's 8 o'clock, you just put the kids to bed and you're sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. It's totally different energy that you bring to a conversation, right? And then there's the human need. So the person entering this conversation, what do they want to do? What do they want to know? What motivates them? What are they worried about? What do they expect from this experience? Do they expect a chatbot to be very dumb, or do they expect this chatbot to be brilliant, like Chat GPT? That's, that informs the conversation already. And then from the assistant's perspective, what's some of the stuff that we can and cannot do, right? Can I answer questions? Can I also do transactions? Do I know certain things already because you are logged in and I recognize that you bought a dishwasher the other day, so you probably have a question about that. What are some of the questions that I need to ask and entities that I need to extract? And what's behavior that I want to promote and discourage? So sometimes I want to promote you adding products to the basket, and I want to discourage you calling us for customer support, right? An interesting question. How can you develop the canvas when you're handling 1 million calls a year? Well, you don't have to do, you don't have to do this 1 million times. That's kind of silly. What you would do is you would look at your own, like at the key use cases, because what you'll see if you have 1 million calls, they'll still be centered around a few key use cases. And what you do is really use the canvas to look at it from the different perspectives, right? It's, it helps you think about this when people have, let's say I'm a bank and people get locked out of the account and therefore they can't do any payments and it stresses them out a lot. Just going over the canvas with a group of people and talking about it and filling this in helps you understand what this conversation might mean for something, and that informs the design that you're going to do later on. So with some of these sections, yes, you can run lots of data on it and find a true answer of what people want and what they want to know. Or you kind of have a workshop with your team and you just answer the questions to the best of your ability just to get a feel for it. Sometimes also what we say, if it's just an FAQ chatbot, you're not going to fill in this whole canvas, right? But what you do then is, in a way, just take 5 deep breaths, think about who it is that this chatbot's going to be talking to, and have, make that come to life as a true person rather than an IP address on the other side of the world. That's really what we're trying to accomplish here. Then for the next step, we now have kind of the goal and the mindset from the assistant's perspective and from the chatbot's perspective. And let's fill this in first. Fooled you. No, so let's say we're doing this with buying sneakers. You've probably seen this example before because I use this a lot. So I want to buy cool sneakers. I want to know which ones to get. I want to look fit and look cool. I'm always a little worried that I get the wrong ones, that I get last year's model and then I look like an idiot. So I expect this assistant to help me find the right sneaker. All right. So from the assistant's perspective, the things I can do is it can help you select sneakers. I can tell you what's in stock. I have a bunch of questions to ask you about your running goal and your shoe size, the price point, etc. And I want to, of course, promote that you add that to the shopping cart. And actually, sometimes just filling this in just pretty quickly just helps you mentalize the context of the conversation. So with key use cases, you spend a lot of time on this. Sometimes you just make sure that you cover it and have an understanding. And then what we do, or what you want to do for your key use cases, is do sample dialogue. And the way to do it is really, if you want to design a conversation, the best way to do it is by having the conversation. So first we mentalize the conversation, then we verbalize the conversation. One person kind of gets into character and studies the side from the human's perspective, and the other one does it from the assistant's perspective. And like improvisational theater, we just let them talk, right? And whenever the assistant says something, the other person responds to it, and vice versa. And doing this exercise allows us to just get a feel for all the questions that might arise, right? So if the assistant says, these shoes are great, and the other person says, all right, but how much do they cost? That's like an annoying question to have to ask for someone. It already creates uncertainty and a little stress because it's about money. So then we learn that, and then we could be like, hey, these shoes are great and they're only $100. Would you like to know more? So by doing this exercise, by getting into character, doing this exercise, it allows us to understand which questions arise, and then we can proactively answer those questions. And that's how we take control of a conversation. Because you'll notice, like, a lot of times chatbots, like, they get overrun by people, right? People are excited to have a certain question to ask, and boom, they overrun the chatbot, and then the chatbot breaks. And then we all say, that's such a stupid chatbot. But by doing this properly and understanding all the different concerns, it allows us to proactively answer those questions in the right order. So even before the question arises, we've already answered it. And people become very confident in the fact that you're going to help them if you do this properly. And this, again, is kind of like the big use case scenario where you would really do this full exercise. But if you have smaller use cases, say it out loud, right? Say it out loud. If it sounds written, rewrite it. Does this answer the question? Just be a bit more critical and verbalize what you're doing. Let's see, there's a question here from Scott Baker. Might be interesting to address real quick. Despite the persona work, I've never had post-launch performance reviews against those personas. It's always analyzing macro trends. Is it valuable to, that's an interesting question. So a lot of times, like, we do persona work, we try to write it in, and then we just launch, right? And then we just look at containment, right? Or are people getting to the end of the dialogue, or we look at, how many handovers to an agent, and becomes very businessy metric. But we don't really look at, was that persona still in there, and was it important that it was in there? And is it important to do so? In a way, as you kind of move up the levels of design patterns, when you're at that functional phase, it's not the most important thing in the world, right? You want people to, you want stuff to work. It needs to be okay-ish. But as you start designing for trust, when conversations become multi-turn, they become personalized, they become integrated, it becomes important that people feel like this is a trustworthy experience. And then persona is kind of the thing that helps you get there to a large extent, right? Because it needs to be consistent in tone of voice. It needs to resonate with people. It needs to give people that feeling that it's okay for them to share some personal information and have a more meaningful interaction with these assistants. So you really need it there. So I think it's really good to actually review that. And we're also working on a little tool that helps you benchmark your prompts against the tone of voice that you've defined as well. And I'll share a screenshot of that later. But yeah, you should definitely do that, because sometimes you might be focused on, what am I writing here? Am I using the wrong words? Does the design make sense? But actually, sometimes, your copywriter will come in and be like, actually, if you say it this way, it feels better. Like it's on brand, and that makes people feel more comfortable. So I don't know if you should do like, hey, is it the actual persona that's still present? Or should you be like, hey, this might, just look at the quality of something and say, persona isn't really present here. So I don't know if you should do a persona audit, or during the audit, be aware that sometimes persona is the thing that's lacking. So yeah, when you do this initial conversation and you kind of role play it and you play around with it, CDI, we really like to use Post-its and pen and paper, and just write it out. Don't try to be perfect. Don't try to make beautiful, perfect prompts immediately. Just try to figure out, what the keywords are that make it work, and play around with it. It's messy, right? And it should be messy. You don't get it right at once, and it's a process. So I think that's an important thing to know. And if you start jumping into the technology immediately, what it does, it really limits you're immediately limited by the capabilities of that technology, where actually what we want to do is figure out what the conversation would be like, and then later on we'll figure out how to make that work with the technology, because the conversations are often just very simple and elegant once you really figure them out and do the hard work. So let's start applying some of these fundamentals. Excuse me. So if we look at the level of conversation design fundamentals, there's acknowledgements. An acknowledgement is really, it tells the customer, I hear you. And in voice, this is very important, because if I say something to a speaker, the speaker tells me, hey, okay, I've been understood, so I should listen up, right? So yeah, I received the input. Then you get the implicit confirmation, or a confirmation in general. What I'm doing here, okay, you want to buy sneakers. What we're doing with the confirmation is telling the customer that we've heard them, but also we've understood them, right? Because if I tell them that I understood them, my customer knows that whatever I'm going to say next is going to be irrelevant to them. If I don't really confirm that I've understood them, then the customer won't be able to repair it when I've misunderstood them, right? So sometimes you have a mismatch where you think somebody asked a question about A, but it turns out they're asking a question about B. So if you then use an implicit confirmation for A, you're giving the customer the opportunity to say, that's not what I meant, let's try this again. All right, so you want to have a confirmation in there. Also, acknowledgement, confirmation, it prepares the brain for the most important information, which is the prompt. Do you know which ones? Acknowledgement, confirmation, prompt. You call this the conversational mantra. And every assistant should always follow that pattern. This is really conversation design fundamentals: acknowledgement, confirmation, prompt. And the confirmation, we have an implicit confirmation and an explicit confirmation. So when our confidence is fairly high, we use an implicit confirmation. So you want to buy sneakers? Do you know which ones? We continue the conversation immediately. Now, if our confidence was low, we might say, okay, sounds like you want to buy sneakers. Is that correct? And then the customer would be, yes, that is correct. So it's an explicit confirmation, and the conversation then continues. So then you'll know for sure that it kind of slows down the conversation. And people do this too. So if I go to the bar during the day, I'd be like, hey man, can I get a beer? Sure, one beer. Do you also want something to eat, or do you want to see a menu? So it's an implicit confirmation. But if I go to that same bar at night and there's music and there's lots of people, I'll be like, hey man, can I beer? And can I get a beer? And he'll be like, hey, what's that? You want a beer? I'll be like, yes, please. All right, brilliant. Do you also want to see the menu? Yeah, I also want to see the menu. So people also use this. Like if we're confident in what the other person said, we use an implicit confirmation. Otherwise, we use an explicit confirmation. Interesting question here. What research do we recommend prior to building the bot persona? Well, I guess you can look at this as very many different ways. But yeah, you have all the marketing research that you already have around your own brand and your audience, right? And then if you know that and you know the topics that you're going to talk about, who makes the most sense to talk to people about that? And I think that kind of informs, the key position of the persona. And you can do very elaborate research on, books like Wired for Speech of why it's important, how people create persona in their minds already, so you can get very academic. But let's say I understand my audience, I understand the topic, so I kind of figure out what their persona might be. If you then want to look at more academic stuff of how to shape that persona, you could be looking at Carl Jung's archetype, for example, because then you might say, oh, it looks like this person is the sage, and then this, the archetype sage, and the sage comes with certain patterns and certain elements, and then you could fill that in for that persona. So that'd be something to look for. But in a way, a lot of time what happens, let's say I'm an energy company and I'm very focused on sustainable energy, wind energy, and I create a persona. How do I now take that value as an organization and add that to the personality? Well, maybe this bot persona loves to go sailing and be on the water in the wind, for example, right? So those are a lot of the, that's how you want to play around with these elements around persona. I don't know if that answered it entirely. And then when we go into the validate process, we did a Wizard of Oz test. We're big advocates of that. Let's say I have my conversation and I've written it out with a bunch of prompts. What I do now is I have my script, and I bring in a bunch of people. 5 to 10 is usually enough, and they can speak freely and interact with our use case, and we just stick to our script. And it very quickly allows us to understand what does and doesn't work in our design. And the first 2 people say something that's like, yeah, shit, we hadn't thought about that. Back to the drawing board. But 5 to 10 people in, you really end up with a conversation that is going to work for most people. Again, this is, if you do this for your most important use cases. I am a retailer and people are looking for their package, and these are the main problems that arise in that process. And this is 80% of my traffic. You do this all the way through, and you do it very detailed, because it's going to give you so much value. If it's a simple FAQ bot, and you write something, it sounds good, ask a friend, hey, does this seem right to you? Right? It's depending on the importance of the use case, you can find out what works best for you. So you can do it in speech, but you could also just do it in chat, right? And copy paste the text of your script. Sometimes what I would do is in live chat in customer service, I just, instead of saying, hey, I'm Hans, the live chat person, I just say, hey, I'm Hans, I'm the chatbot. And I just use my chatbot script and see how people respond to it. I don't know if that would still be allowed after following the ethics course, but it's a good way to get feedback quickly. So let's elevate our sneaker design by more advanced copywriting techniques, right? And see what we come up with. So this is, one level up in design patterns. Okay, I'm going to help you find the right sneakers. So that's anticipatory enthusiasm. So what I'm doing is I'm creating the image in your head that you're going to be successful. This is why airliners show you a picture of the destination when you book your ticket. So you already see yourself there, and that increases motivation. I'm going to ask you 3 simple questions. Does that sound good? So that's expectation management, where I'm going to tell you what is going to happen. And that should make it easier for you to feel comfortable in this experience. Or social proof, right? For most people, this only takes a minute. So that implies that more people talk to this chatbot to get sneakers, and they're all going to be successful. So this is another, behavior design principle that we can apply. Or I might then add some personality. I'm going to run you through 3 simple questions. Ready, set, go, maybe later, right? And we're adding some personality. So you kind of see that, you first have the level of conversation design fundamentals, and then we start adding more advanced writing techniques for specific use cases if it's needed. So then on top of that, just some extra, this is just one prompt of what that could look like. Then we have the turn taking. A lot of people still don't get this right, which is kind of weird because it's such a key thing, I would say. So let's say somebody says, can you order me a pizza? Yes, what kind do you want? We have a special for $7.50 and there's a whole menu to choose from. That's great. So there is a big problem with this. It's like I ask a question and then I continue to talk. And it's a lot of times content writers that end up with this mistake because, when we write longer pieces of content to sort of speed it up a little bit, we throw in these little questions to make it more engaging. But in chat, that doesn't really work because if I'm a voice assistant and I was like, what kind do you want? And then someone answers and I continue to talk, the whole system breaks down. And it's really annoying. It's really terrible. So don't do that. So this person's always also like, wow, that's confusing. I don't know what to do anymore. Help, help, help. So what could we do, right? So can you order me a pizza? Sure, happy to help you order a pizza. Do you know which kind you want? I'll have a pepperoni. All right. Got it. Pepperoni it is. Do you also want a drink with that? So got it. Acknowledgement. Pepperoni is a confirmation. Do you also want a drink with that? That's our prompt, right? And this is how we build up these conversations. And I'll leave you with a party favorite. Turn take, or after turn taking, the Jenga technique, of course. So what's the Jenga technique? And we all know Jenga, right? It's that game where you've got like the tower of all these blocks, and you take out one block, and whoever takes out one block too many and the tower collapses, that person has lost the game. Well, we can do that in conversation design too. You can do that in any type of writing, actually. Usually when you write anything, you can take out about 50% of the words, because as we're writing, we're often like thinking about it and we're not really sure. We're playing around with it. So we use too many words because it's still a thinking process. But then with good editing, we can usually take out about 50% of the words. So I can tell you more about that. Jenga technique is a technique that helps you make longer sentences a little shorter so that they're easier to read for people, right? So there's a lot here that I can take out. I can tell you more about that. Jenga makes longer sentences shorter so that they're easier to read. Or Jenga makes sentences easier to read, right? So, woo, Jenga, you see just how much kind of you can take out. And that's kind of it's kind of a neat thing. Whenever you write anything, like just go over it and see what you can take out. And also do it on your emails, because sometimes you guys send me very long emails and I'm like, that could have been shorter. Saves us time. So how do we check this? This is kind of like a fun thing that we're doing here at CDI. If we have all of these design patterns and we kind of can, if you have a prompt, we can benchmark it against those design patterns and actually give you feedback on it. So whenever you write I, the system will say, hey, maybe it's better to write you. Or when you're too long, you don't pass the one breath test, then we say maybe make it a little shorter. So here you see we get a score of 60. And if we rewrite that and we make it shorter, we see that we get a higher score. So these are some of the things that we can do to make these prompts better. This is something that we use internally. If you want to use it, maybe check in with us and we can put you on a wait list for beta testing or whatever. So yeah, this is kind of like the design track that we just talked about. And the next step would really be to start training your model. So for every prompt, we want to have training phrases, right? The different ways that people can say that. We source those from call centers, chat logs, common sense, wherever people are talking. We want to analyze that and see how we can use that. And then we connect it, right? We want to connect our assistant with backend channels. So if I want to use my CRM, I need to have a connection there. And if I want to connect it to WhatsApp, then I got to have a deployment there. So we train our system, we connect it to the right backend systems and interfaces. And then when we deploy, we continue to monitor and shape it that way, right? So this is really the whole CDI, Conversational AI Workflow. And you see, it's definitely a little different than the old courses. it's the same stuff that's happening, but we've just changed the language a little bit. Mentalize, verbalize, validate, and elevate in the design track. And then we train, connect, and deploy. Those are really the simplest way of saying it. And behind all of those steps, there's a lot of detail, of course. And I think one of the things that has changed with us in these past few years is where we would initially be like, everything needs to be super detailed and done to perfection. Where now, if you're starting out in the persona, just, have some idea of who the persona is and what it speaks like and, where the words are coming from, and just focus on functional design patterns. And then, once you start adding to scope and you get some success, you have some return on investment and you want to do more integration, that's when you got to also take that persona to the next level. That's where you're going to start incorporating more design patterns, and you develop that skill set over time as a conversation designer as you start adding to scope. Because like we said, the more conversations you have, the better they should be. And that's how you gradually grow into it. I always have this little checklist at the end in case I run out of time. I think we're pretty good now. We have about 10 minutes for questions. But here, what I always say now is, whatever you do, take a deep breath. Think about who you're creating this for. It's like, instead of just writing an answer, be like, what are we doing here today? Oh, I'm answering this question, or I'm solving this problem because this problem matters to these types of people. Have the conversation, right? Or at least say it out loud. That's the best way to design. When you're writing active language over passive language, right? Active language generally makes it shorter, but it also makes it better. And when we think and create stuff, a lot of passive language sneaks in. So that's also something that tool will give you feedback on. It's better to have strong verbs over adverbs, simple words over complex words, clarity over detail. So a lot of times we add a lot of detail to the answers that we give. There's no need for that. Just be clear, and then expect, the need for elaboration. So you might say it in a very simple, clear way, and then somebody says, well, what does that mean? Or can you tell me more about that? Then you can add more detail to it. Conversational mantra, acknowledgement, confirmation, prompt. When you have lists, use discourse markers like first of all, second of all, first option, second option. Therefore, there's a whole list of discourse markers, and you can use it. It's like navigation in text. If it sounds written, rewrite it. It's that simple. Read it out loud. If it sounds written, it's time to rewrite. Pass the one breath test. Right? So if you can't say the prompt in one breath, it's too long. And if it's too long, we use the Jenga technique to shorten it. And I think for a lot of these prompts, is the desired behavior clear? That's really a big thing. Sometimes we create something, we're so caught up in our organization, and you want to read it from somebody else's perspective and be like, actually, is it now very clear what that person needs to do? Is it a clear prompt? Is there a clear action? How does this now continue? Because just answering a question often isn't, people aren't asking questions. They want to have a problem solved. So your answer should help them solve that problem, right? And instead of just like, here's information. So I heard a sound. Not sure what that was. What happened there? Yeah, still here. Yeah, so some of those new courses, like I said in the beginning, just go to CDI.cx. Yeah, we got a short URL now. Boom, boom. You can always go to CDI.cx/courses, and you'll find the one on the ethics and CDI workflow. That's me with a picture. You can follow me on Twitter and on LinkedIn, or shoot me an email, whatever you want. I'll stop sharing now so I can see the screen again. We've got a few more minutes, so that's pretty neat. Let's see. We still have 125 people. That is really cool. Do you think Amazon Lex services are the best to act on? That's generally not how I think. I think, depending on your entire ecosystems, your business goals, your backend systems, and your audit, whatever you're trying to do, there is usually a handful of solutions that will work for you, right? And if you've got everything built on Google, then Amazon Lex is probably not the best way forward. And if you got everything built with Amazon, then Lex probably makes a little more sense, right? So those are more the considerations. And I think the win you're gonna get is much bigger, sort of with focusing on the skill set that you can develop, and actually how do you leverage the tools and how they connect with the rest of your organization. I find that more important than the actual specific tool itself. What tool do we use to analyze conversations? That's the internal thing that we're developing. We might open it up at one point. If you want to know more, you can just shoot me an email. My email is on the screen. It's hans@cdi.cx. That's also short now. I didn't realize that. hans@cdi.cx. Shoot us an email, and we might be able to show it to you. Let's see. I loved hearing your thinking. Well, thank you. That's very nice of you. Recently joined a new team with a bot that has almost 2,000 intents. That's a stretch back for almost 5 years. It's been about 6 months, and there's a lot of old stuff that needs to be cleaned up. Do you have recommendations for cleaning up bloated knowledge bases, while also juggling? And you're on your, oh, wow, Angela, that is tough. Yeah, so what do I do when I sort of join a new team? There's so much there already. Where do I start? What do I got to do? It's tricky, right? We can definitely have a conversation about that maybe offline, because we would need to know a little more. But yeah, if you shoot me an email, I'm happy to give that a little bit of a think. Should you design for voice and text channels together? Oh yeah, we didn't even touch about that, but that's a good one, Gary. So what we like to do is design voice first. That's why we have the whole role-playing thing, right? If you design voice first, it's like the minimal real estate that you could have. So if you force yourself to do it voice first, then you can also use that for chat. And then maybe you might make some adjustments for chat by actually saying, you know what, I can use a button or show a picture, or it's a little easier. So design voice first and then use it on all the chat channels as well. But if you design for chat, then you cannot necessarily use that for voice, right? Because if you design with buttons first, then how are you going to do that with voice? So design voice first, and then, see where you can leverage that and make some adjustments per channel. That's the way to do it. So your core database is voice first design. Besides turn taking, what techniques do you recommend to keep users on track and not go rogue? Yeah, so it's the turn taking, and what's kind of implicit in the turn taking is framing. And framing has to do with, if I say, ask me any question, you can ask me any question, and boom, we go off track immediately. If I say, ask me a question about coffee, you're probably going to ask me a question about coffee. So by framing the experience, by using specific language, I influence what people are going to say back to me, right? And it allows me to take control of the conversation. So 2 things to do to take control of the conversation. One is doing the role-playing exercise so that you understand which questions to proactively answer so that they don't start asking questions. That allows you to stay in the driver's seat. And when you do so, frame properly so that you get the answers that you want to continue the conversations properly. And once you've designed this properly, through repair, make sure that they stay on track, right? So sometimes, if people change their minds, you can just actually say, well, I actually need to know this from you now to continue the conversation, right? Sometimes engineers are very proud that they can let people change their minds and change topics mid-conversation. It's really cool that you can do that from an engineering perspective. But as a designer, we should actually just say, you know what, let's finish this conversation first. I'll ask you a few more questions, and then we can talk about something else, right? So once you've really designed it and use proper, have the right sequence of information, use proper framing, then through repair, keep people in. And you can be pretty strict on that. So that also helps. Can you say a little more about your background and the history of CDI? Who are we, guys? Yeah, that's a good one. Who are you? Why are you doing this? So I wanted to be a novelist when I was younger. I'm still relatively young, but and all the publishers were like, yeah, that's not a good idea. So that was all right. Then I'll do something else. And I became a copywriter. at a at a startup incubator, and I learned about technology and entrepreneurship. And then I had a failed startup video streaming thing, so I ended up working in customer service. Then I saw customer service being automated through chatbots, and everybody struggled with that. Nobody knew how to write for chatbots. And I was like, I understand how to write dialogue from when I wanted to be a novelist. I understand the technology from my time at the incubator. And now I understand customer service. So I can probably figure this out. So I started doing that, and I started writing about it and working with a few companies here in the Netherlands, like a telco and an insurance company, which was really cool. And then I found my current business partner who had a background in behavior design. And so they were psychologists, and they thought about conversational interfaces from that psychological perspective. And that kind of made perfect sense because we had an artificial brain talk to a human brain. And so we needed to understand technology and psychology and how they connect with each other through dialogue. So we started doing that together. And then at one point, I wrote an article and I said, we train our own people in our own academy, but it was just me and Olaf. But then people from around the world started reaching out and like, can we join that academy? So we started developing some curriculum around chatbots, and it was really cool. And we did webinars. And then Google, I should say one of the larger search engines, reached out and they had launched a smart assistant. So they wanted to educate people in conversation design. So they took us under their wings and they taught us all this stuff, and which was really cool. Wally Brill, if you Google him, he's a super cool guy. And I'm really honored to have had him as a mentor. He taught us all these things, and then he connected us with all these other conversation designers that have been doing this for a long time and worked at Apple and Samsung and all these cool companies. And they all said the same thing. It's like, you cannot teach anyone this. Like, it's so different than any other design discipline. But we saw sort of the patterns of what everybody was doing. And then we were able to capture that and turn that into a workflow, the CDI workflow that we can now teach people and certify people on. And that's kind of how we started and how we started doing this. And then that gets out of control. And before you know it, you've got thousands of students around the world. So that's our story. Thank you for the refresher. Yay. The adjustments I've made make a lot of sense. Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you for that feedback. You should soon transfer your voice into a bot as a conversational sample voice as mantra. This webinar was relaxing. I should do that. I should do a book and then do an audio book. I want to do that too. Any guidance on next steps for UX UI designer who wants to pivot into conversation design? I would say we have also, I don't know if you've seen that, we have free courses and stuff. I would start with that and just familiarize yourself with it and build a few bots. What you see is, I guess they're enterprises are hiring two things: people that actually have the full skill set and are very advanced and have deep knowledge, but also people that have a lot of experience in developing a design practice at an organization. So there's also that if you're a very experienced UX designer, you don't need to be an expert conversation designer. It's like that new workflow course would be perfect for you because it's about, how do I think about this stuff and how do I build a practice around it? So I think, build a few bots, follow those free courses, maybe do that workflow course, just make sure that this is for you. And then based on where you are in your career, you can make some moves there. You can also check in with us and see if we can give you some guidance. We also have ambassadors that you can talk to figure that out. Is a chatbot a right solution for FAQ bot, which directs people to a web page? Yeah, that's always like, if an FAQ bot, it's like, here's an answer, but here's a page, right? Those navigation things. A lot of companies start out like that. Is it a good use case? Meh. Is it a good idea to do that? Yeah, because I think an organization, you should ask yourself, do I believe that we're going to use AI to talk to people increasingly more over time? And I think every organization will say, yes, we believe that we will be doing that. Then you need to start doing it. And you need to figure out how to do it. So an FAQ bot is perfect. And yeah, if you hand people off to web pages as a first step, so be it. But you should force yourself to learn how to actually solve those answers within the chatbot, whether that's first by giving the right answers and then later on you integrate it more, But because I think you just need to develop that capability of using AI to talk to people. And if this is your entry point, go for it. But force yourself to answer the tougher questions in design. Thank you for an insightful session. Thank you. Hey, that's nice. Very cool. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome session as always. Well, thank you. Awesome set. Wow. I'm getting a lot of awesomes today. Well, thanks for a refresher. Thank you for great. This is the first time I've joined your session, and I must say it's very interesting. Well, thank you for being here today. Now it's going really quick. What recommendations do you have for someone searching for a CXD job as a newcomer that is newly certified? You can always check in with us. We have a job board on our website as well, but you can also shoot us an email. Sometimes we know who's hiring. We also have a consulting firm that might be hiring. There are more and more openings. And if you're on the search, build portfolio, build portfolio, build portfolio. In the new course as well, there's a whole workbook. And at the end of that workbook, you have like a portfolio, and you have something you can demonstrate to anyone that's hiring. So that's also really good. Thank you. Feeling enlightened. Well, that's very good. Starting to feel like a cult leader. Thank you, insightful. Merci. Fantastic. Thank you, CDI. Thank you. Thank God here late. There's a recording. It's going to be okay. You can watch the beginning. Thank you. Hey, Laura. So good to see you here. That's so nice. Thanks for all these insights and guidance. It's encouraging during a time. Yeah, so many layoffs. We didn't really talk about that, but yeah, there are a lot of tech companies are laying people off, and that's kind of sad. But in some conversational AI teams, but I think we are in a very good space, right? Because companies will be looking to automate more, differentiating through design as well. So this is definitely one of the better industries to be in terms of recessions and layoffs. Grazie mille. Thanks for your community and great guys. Well, thank you so much. You are hilarious. This is a culture. Yes. Wow. That's a good one. I did not realize that. Thank you. Thanks, Hans. Very interesting. This is so much fun. And how many people do we still have here? We still have a whole bunch, right? Yeah, 85. Oh, we lost a few. Wow. I guess people have lives, right? 1 point. You gotta. Dude, the person that was watching this with the 2-year-old toddler, are you still here, or did you give up? Thanks for the humor. Oh, brilliant. Just joined your free course. Oh, it's good to have you here with us, Eleanor. Thank you. What would be your recommendations for the best path to start training my team? We built bots for e-commerce and use Dialogflow for the AI to skill up your entire team. Well, we have team programs. That's generally what we do, right? A lot of companies come with a full team. They're like, we've got these people. What we generally do is we have an assessment that allows us to see, who's a good fit for what specific role within that team. So we use personality tests for that. And then we just start skilling them up. So there's the online courses, but that often goes with workshops as well, more hands-on stuff and coaching. And that can be in Dialogflow or whatever you want it to be, right? But yeah, just grow into it, develop the skill set, develop the muscle. That's it, putting in the hours. And that will be it. Thank you so much, everybody. You've been wonderful. We should do more of these and open them up to everybody. Ciao, ciao.